the adoration and all the praise. We thank you for it. We thank you for our nation, Nigeria. We thank you, Father, because you are the God of growth. We thank you because you are the God who does new things. We thank you for you are the God that makes opportunities for people. Father, this morning we have come, Father, to hear and to learn. Open our eyes, O God. Grant us the grace to have understanding of the place you are taking our nation to. Help us, O Lord God. Father, as many as come, Father, let your blessings be upon them. Help us, O Lord God, to speak. Father, grant them divine wisdom. Help them, O Lord God, to speak as you lead them to speak. Mighty One of Israel, Father, when we finish and leave this place, let it be all to your glory. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. Praise the Lord.
Good morning. Welcome to the Economic Outlook 2018. And just look around and identify somebody that you don't know and say welcome and Happy New Year. Shall we please rise again for the national anthem, and this will be rendered by Team Definition.
Hello.
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 Nigeria, so obey.
notice, I stepped away from the microphone because I knew that I couldn't attempt to be part of that kind of rendition. Welcome again. This is King's Court. And I would remind you that this is a church. We're not a business organization. We're followers of Christ, a man that was born about 2,000 years ago. And when he was about to start his business, he identified 12 men in different spheres. He identified businessmen, he identified finance men, he identified people in different spheres of life such that his business may make impact. And that is what we believe here in the King's Court. That as followers of Christ, we must make impact in different spheres of life. Our belief is that as you see us, you see our leader, Jesus. He understood leadership. He understood impact in the secular life. And that's what we that's what we are called to do in King's Court. Hence, you find us doing many things in the marketplace and in other spheres for us to impact the world as we deem fit. And it's also interesting that here we are led by a gentleman who has also been called at several times, different levels of government, state government, federal government now. We have lent him to the state government before. We're now lending him to the federal government. And he's making the impact that we believe we should make. So today, this event we've had for at least 4 years, because we believe that as Christians, or even as Nigerians, we shouldn't just bury our head without knowledge. We expect that we should be knowledgeable. And so we have this event to bring people together, professionals together, to provide knowledge, to inform strategy, and such that even in your divine closet, as you bow your head to pray and engage God, you are informed of the opportunities that may or would arise in the course of the fiscal year. And therefore today, from the look of the 2018 budget, we believe that Nigeria is getting to the point of growth and pursuing opportunities. And so today, we would have two speakers, the Minister of Budget and National Planning, who would set the scene, and then we would also have the keynote address, who would also sort of critique the budget, and then we would go into different segments. 3 segments at any point in time. We have 3 different venues. We have a venue on the 3rd floor, we have a venue on the 5th floor, and then we have a venue on the, well, what I don't want to call the basement, but the ground floor. Please bear with us. You should have your programs anytime from now. The printer was delayed, but it should be delivered in the next 20 minutes thereabout. Also, as you look around this facility and you want to make yourself convenient, you would find the restrooms and the washrooms to my left. If you go out this exit, you'd find some down there. And then when you go to those floors, as I've mentioned, the 3rd floor, the 5th floor, and the ground floor, you would also find conveniences close to you. thank you for coming to this event, and I'll call on Pastor Ben to give us his opening remarks. PB, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see many of you, many familiar faces. Some I'm seeing for the first time this year. So let me just take this opportunity and say Happy New Year to everyone again. Even if I had said it to you previously, it bears repeating. Happy New Year. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm very expectant about 2018. I believe it will be definitely a better year than 2017 was. 2017, I believe, was a better year than 2016 for most. I'm sure some people will not agree. For some people, 2016, that for many of us seemed like the annus horribilis. For some people, they'll tell you it was their best year ever. But that's how life is. So when we speak about this being a better year, we're speaking generally and for most. And the truth is, as we look around us, we'll see, if we track all the economic indicators, they're mostly heading in the right direction. But the question that someone may have is why, Brother Deji reminded us a short while ago that, this is a church. So for some people, they still struggle with reconciling why, as a church, we are heavily involved in programs like this. It's very simple, and I'll try and explain briefly. When Jesus came to this earth, what he brought us was the gospel of reconciliation. A gospel of reconciling this earth to heaven. Reconciling everything on this earth, the people on this earth, and the systems of this earth to what God originally intended this to be like, and which is a place like heaven, where things work perfectly, where there's peace, there's harmony, where there's equity, there's justice, where there's abundance for everyone, where there's joy. That's the earth that God had in mind when he created the earth originally. Nothing resembling what you and I now have. It was man's sinfulness, it was man's rebellion against God that resulted in the broken systems and that we have all over the place now. And so we are called to preach a gospel of reconciliation, which affects all aspects of the life of man, not just the gospel of salvation. The gospel of salvation seeks simply to reconcile sinful man to Christ, to accept Christ as a Lord and Savior. But that's only just the starting point. God's intent is that all aspects of that, we all live what we call an integrated life. For too many people, they live a dichotomized life. One different person in church or wherever they aim to worship, and a different person at work, yet a different person at home, a different person in the society. Too many people are schizophrenic. That's not what God intended us to be. Our lives should be integral, at work, at church, at home, wherever. The same, person. In the marketplace, the same person. Jesus Christ was very interested in the marketplace, and is still very interested in the marketplace. When you read the Bible, when you read the Gospels, apart from the subject of the kingdom of heaven, the second subject that Jesus spoke the most about was money. Money is very spiritual. So people must have a right understanding of money. Because if you do not, money is capable of destroying. The Bible says money answers all things. But money also, the Bible says, is the root of all evil. And what makes the difference? It's not money itself per se. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's the attitude that we bring towards, towards it. And so we, as a church, believe, therefore, that will help people to approach the marketplace with understanding and with the right attitude. And that's why we have these marketplace outreaches. At the beginning of each year, the second Saturday of the year, of January, typically, we hold the economic outlook, during which, as you heard earlier, we just try and, look ahead and get, various subject matter experts to speak and share their knowledge, with us. Wisdom, the Bible tells us, is the principal thing, and we're all encouraged to get wisdom. But then wisdom also is defined as the right application of knowledge. You cannot apply the knowledge that you do not have. And so that's what this is about. This is a platform for knowledge sharing. We bring people who are knowledgeable in these matters, and they inform us. They share their wealth of knowledge with us. Thereafter, it's up to us what we do with that knowledge. Rightly applying that knowledge is what wisdom is about. And so, as you listen today, as you absorb all of the knowledge that will be shared here today, thereafter, what you must do is prayerfully seek the guidance of God and the application of that, knowledge. And as you rightly apply that knowledge, then you can be said to be wise. But the Bible also tells us that a fool is the one who has said in his heart that there is no God. And a fool foolishness is the opposite of wisdom. If any of us here was called a fool, they would take offense, and justifiably so. But basically, the Bible says that anybody who says in his heart that there is no God is a fool. And I know that I'm speaking to a room of not foolish people. No foolish people in this room today. So as we get all of this knowledge about the economy, about the different sectors, let's still understand that ultimately there is a God who rules in the affairs of men. And, let's, have the humility to accept that we do not know it all, that we do not have all the answers. And be able to go to this God and seek his guidance as to what to do with the knowledge that we have received. That's what we believe in this that's what we believe in this place, and that's why we have put this forum together. It's not the only one. We have a series of marketplace outreaches. This one we hold at the beginning of the year. We tend to have a half year, around mid-year, to do a mid-year review again of where things are going, in the economy, so that people who have missed it may get a chance to reset. It's a chance for reset by the halfway mark. And then in October, as has been our custom for years now, we will also then have a bigger 3-day event that we call the Kingdom Summit. The Kingdom Summit spans about 3 days, over which, again, we bring subject matter experts from all over the world. And the thrust is for people really, these are people successful in different aspects of the marketplace. And by the way, when we speak of the marketplace here, it's the broad definition of the marketplace. The marketplace includes businesses, it includes the professions, it includes governance, it includes education, it includes healthcare, everything. All of that is what collectively we call the marketplace. So when we speak about the marketplace, please understand that we're not just talking about about businesses, so to say. And it's in that respect also that tomorrow our interest in the marketplace moves us to focus on the education sector. Tomorrow here we'll have what we call this special education sector service, during which, again, during tomorrow's service, we're bringing people. I'm sure everyone here will agree with me that our education sector is in trouble. That sector needs help. It needs fixing. And it's really up to you and I to fix this sector. Each of us to contribute our quota rather than simply complain. Here we do not believe in complaining about how broken things are. We believe rather in contributing our quota with God enabling us to fix, whatever is broken. That's what the gospel is about. That's what Christ came to do. God created a perfect world. Man's rebellion broke that perfect system. Christ came to reconcile that system back to what God originally intended. So whatever stuff of life that is broken, there is a role for us. And tomorrow we just want to begin to look into the education sector in detail, share what the challenges are, put those challenges before God, and seek, again, acknowledge about that sector, and lay it before God and seek His wisdom and seek His guidance as to what we could do to be able to fix that sector. That tomorrow also will be taking the opportunity to appreciate, teachers. There is currently a raging controversy in one of the states in the country where the governor has just decided to take on the challenge. Research after research has shown that the biggest problem in Nigeria's education system today, easily the biggest problem, especially with basic education and even going up to tertiary education, is teacher quality. And generally people haven't had the courage to deal with it. But someone has decided to just take that problem on. But teaching is a noble profession, and teacher quality, the decline in teacher quality cannot all be blamed on the teachers themselves. It's a systemic problem. You know, it's a systemic. It's a systemic problem. As they say, if you pay peanuts, you'll end up with monkeys. The country haven't treated teachers right. Consequently, that profession hasn't attracted the best Nigerians. And so we must, in addressing that problem, we must also look at it from the, both the, supply and demand sides, as well as, the policy. Tomorrow we'll be just contributing our own token, just trying to appreciate teachers. It's also, we call it Teacher Appreciation, Day, where people in that profession are to be appreciated, made to feel good about the work, that they do, and we will be, some of them who have been, really notable over the years, will be taking the time to, give them some reward publicly, acknowledge them, and this just gives you an example of what we do here. When I say that, we have various outreaches into the marketplace. In the course of this year, we'll have other special sector services. We'll have the justice sector, one for the justice sector. We'll have one for the financial services sector. We'll have one for the arts and entertainment sector. These are the ones I can readily remember. So for today, I just like to say welcome to all of you who have taken the time to come. I assure you it will be well worth your while. If you look at the lineup of speakers that we have today, you will understand what I mean by this being a day and a time that will be well worth your while. I'm actually done. I'll just speak on until the minister walks into the room, but I know what is here. I saw he'd step out, and I thought you went to welcome him. I'll welcome and introduce the Honorable Minister, and then in definition will lead us in the national anthem again, and then the Minister will make his presentation. This morning, it gives me special pleasure, and it's my honor to welcome and introduce to you the Honorable Minister for Budget and National Planning, who is my boss. As the Director General of the Budget Office of the Federation, I report to the Honorable Minister. The Honorable Minister, Senator Udoma, prior to this appointment, this last appointment, his most recent appointment as minister, was a senior partner at the firm of Udoma and Bello Osage, one of the leading law firms in this city and indeed in this nation. He was previously a two-term member of the Nigerian Senate from 1999 to 2007, during which he served in various capacities: the chairman of the Committee on National Planning, chairman Revenue Mobilization and Poverty Alleviation, and chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and during his second term as the chief whip of the Senate. After serving in the Senate, Senator Udoma was appointed chairman of UAC of Nigeria PLC, and then also the chairman, was the first chairman of the Corporate Affairs Commission between 1991 and 1992, the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission as well, as chairman of Securities and Exchange Commission, and he was also chairman of Union Bank of Nigeria PLC up until the time of his appointment. Much earlier in his career, he served as special advisor to the Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources between 1993 and 1994. So if you called Senator Udoma a private sector person, you'll be right. If you called him a public sector person, you'll be right. And I think the enigma is that over the years, he has been in public service for quite a long time, but somehow manages to have the reputation of a private sector person. Senator Udoma holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in jurisprudence, a Bachelor of Civil Law degree, and a Master of Arts from St. Catherine's College, Oxford University. He was called to the Nigerian bar in 1978. Join me in making Senator Udoma welcome to the King's Court. And so right after the national anthem, he will step up and make his presentation.
pastor in charge of the King's Court, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me say a very good morning to you all. I'm delighted to be here, but indeed I didn't have a choice. Apart from the fact that it's difficult for me to say no to Pastor Ben Akabweze, who I've known for a very long time, and he's somebody who is dedicated to national service. But beyond that, when I saw the invitation, he said I was summoned to the King's Court. And as you know, nobody can say no to being summoned by the King to the King's Court. So it's really a privilege for me to be here to come and share with you a few of the things that we are doing as an administration, and also to give you a sense of the opportunities that are available as 2018 unfolds. Let me start off by saying Happy New Year to you all. Now, as Pastor Ben Akabweze said, I'm a private sector person, and I emphasize that. I am indeed a private sector person, a person who, but a person who believes that no matter how well you do in the private sector, you should always take advantage of any opportunity to provide a service to the nation in any way that an opportunity, what the opportunity throws up. It could be in a charity, it could be in an NGO, it could be directly in government. I have had opportunities to serve in government, but I always tell people that I see it as a short-term national service. I come in, I do my little bit, and I go back. Because I've always believed that you should earn your living from the private sector, and that the public sector is really for giving back. And so when, to my surprise, and it was a real surprise, I was appointed as a minister by President Muhammadu Buhari, I was very surprised because at that stage, I was actually committed to a private sector role in Union Bank and UAC and in my law firm, and I wasn't thinking of doing any public service at that time. But it was a time that the economy was in very, very bad shape. As chairman of Union Bank, we had called in consultants in 2015 to do an analysis of how they saw the economy unfolding in 2015 and beyond. And all we could see was difficulties, hardship. What we could see was the currency under pressure. And this was as a result of our dependence on a commodity, crude oil, that started collapsing in price from 2014. And with the collapse in price and with no buffers, it was clear that we were moving towards a recession and conceivably even a depression if something was not done. So when I was invited, I said, well, I can stay and continue my business and the various interests I was pursuing, But even those businesses would be affected by what was happening in the wider economy. In any case, it is rare, it's a rare opportunity for somebody to be called upon who didn't actually participate in producing the president in any way. And I was called upon, and he said he had confidence in me and that he felt I could help. So I accepted. And once I accept to do something, I put in everything. So I gave up on everything else. I resigned from everything else. I don't even want to know what they're doing. I tell them not to even keep me informed. I'm out. Right now, I work 7 days a week. Well, not 24 hours a day because I have to sleep. But all my waking moments concerned and trying to see what one can do about fixing the problem, fixing, solving, and changing things. Because I believe we have so much potential in this country. Now, sometimes I meet classmates of mine from university. Indeed, Tony Blair was a year ahead of me in Oxford, and I had a number of friends who ended up with high positions in the UK, and some of them are managing partners of the top law firms. And when I see them, and I used to beat most of them in school, and when I see them, they say to me, "What is happening in your country?" It is an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment where we have so much talent in this country, and yet we are where we are. So what it needs is organization. That is what it needs. We can make it in Nigeria. I am convinced about that. We just need organization. We need confidence in ourselves. And we need to stop knocking down ourselves. Because the typical Nigerian believes that anything anybody is doing, he first accuses him or challenges it or criticizes it first, before even looking to see whether there is any good in it. And that is partly because of the history of bad governance. And so sometimes we just feel that because we've had a history of bad governance, we don't even recognize improvement when we see them. But I believe that working together, we can improve things. So when I came in, appointed as a minister, we met the situation, high insecurity, massive corruption, rising unemployment, poor infrastructure, capital flight, money was just flying out, and which was putting pressure on the naira and other structural weaknesses. But you all experienced it. I don't have to tell you about it. It was tough, and it is still tough. But at least I believe that we are moving in the right direction. So what actions did we take when we came in? The first thing that we did was we came out with a strategic implementation plan, which was anchored on the 2016 budget. The 2016 budget was an expansive budget because when you are moving towards a recession, you have to reflate the economy. You have to look for revenues. At a time when revenues are decreasing, you have to find ways of looking for revenues to spend your way out of the recession. So we came out with an expansive 2016 budget and a strategic implementation plan for that budget. There were 34 key actions that we set out in the SIP, amongst which was dedicating at least 30% of the budget to capital, because it's capital that really gets the economy reflated. It is that spending that impacts on the economy. And since 2016, we have been able to achieve that 30% dedication to capital. And in 2015, the percentage was about 15 or 16%. So you can see it was a very big jump to go from that to 30%. And we focused on critical infrastructure. We also introduced a social investment program in which we dedicated 500 billion naira. So these were the things that we did, the immediate things that we did to try to stabilize the economy. Whilst we were doing that, we were working on a medium-term plan, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Before we came out with this plan, we had extensive consultations. We consulted with the governors of the states. We consulted with the commissioners of planning, because really this is one economy, and the states play a very major role. So we consulted with them. We consulted with our international development partners, with the World Bank, with the IMF. And of course, we consulted with the National Assembly, because the National Assembly play a critical role. And then, most importantly, we consulted with the private sector, because ultimately, it is the activities of the private sector that is really going to get this growth back. What government has to do is to provide the environment, the enabling environment. I'm sure you know all about that. And so this was the background to the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. When you are developing a plan, you start from what is your vision. What is the vision that we have for this country? And what we tried to do is to consult extensively to make sure that the vision that we are putting out is a vision shared by all Nigerians. It's very important, because it's important that everybody has a sense of ownership of what we were doing. So we didn't think that government is there, the people are there. We thought really we should work together and have a commonly shared vision. And the commonly shared vision, after extensive consultation, is that we all want a sustained, inclusive, diversified growth. We all want growth, but want that growth to be sustained. That means it should not be dependent on a single commodity or a single activity. It should be inclusive. Because at one time when we were growing at 5-6%, we found that poverty levels were still rising. So we didn't have inclusive growth. So the growth must be inclusive. It must carry everybody along. And to be inclusive, it must be job creating as well. It should be diversified and sustained. And the aim should be to achieve the maximum welfare of all the citizens. So that whatever, ensure that everybody is carried along. And this vision was a vision that after extensive consultation, we came out with, that was shared by all Nigerians. And I believe everybody here wants growth. If there's anybody who doesn't want growth, can you raise your hand? So everybody wants growth. So what we simply need is working together to get that growth. Because whatever you want to do, unless you are growing, you simply do not have the resources to attend to whatever else you want to do. And then the principles. It's important that we have clear principles, otherwise we will be pushing in different directions. So I did speak about growth. So one of the principles, fundamental principle, is tackling the constraints for growth. It's important that we remove all the things that are constraining our growth. In order to do that, we must allow markets to function. I do not believe, and it has already been established because the Russians tried it, that where the government tries to direct the economy to produce all goods and services, it fails to supply qualitative services. It cannot compete. So you need the market. You need the private sector. So when you are unsure of how to distribute a service, use the market. And then where there is market failure, the state can come in to make up for the market failure. And it's important that we bear this in mind. This might seem trite, but in fact, a lot of times, many governments believe as if the market is not important. But the market is important. The private sector is important because where you have so many different people working for their own objectives, it's a bit like the unseen hand. It can actually help in terms of the common good. So you need to leverage the power of the private sector. While doing that, it's important that you uphold the core values, one of which is integrity. I think I'm almost sure about this, that one of the greatest, if not the greatest problem we've had has really been the issue of corruption. Because corruption breeds distrust. So integrity is important because people have to have trust in their government. And one of the things that really drew me to President Muhammadu Buhari is his pledge to fight against corruption. And then it's important that we promote national cohesion and social inclusion. So the broad objectives of the ERGP are, as I said, to restore and sustain growth, to build a competitive economy. For the economy to grow, it has to be competitive. Because we have to be able to produce goods and services that our people buy and use. If it is not competitive, we will not even get our own people to use it. Not to talk about exporting it. And we need to export to generate the foreign currency so that we're not dependent on crude oil. And then, most importantly, we must invest in our people. Because it is true, our people are our greatest resource. It is the people that can make things happen. The resources are used by people. So, but people are the most important. So those, the broad objectives. But you can't achieve everything at the same time. So you must set out your key execution priorities. There's so much for us to do. But what is the key? What are the things that if we can do quickly and get right, if we can actually transform Nigeria and transform the economy? So we set out 5. The first is to stabilize the macroeconomic environment. The second is to achieve agriculture and food security. Agriculture is important because the low-hanging fruit. We can achieve dramatic improvements in agriculture. We have land, we have the people. And many of the crops have a short turnaround within a year. You can actually get rice, clear the land, plant the crop, and produce your yield and sell within a year. So agriculture is important, and it's important that we feed ourselves. And it's important that we produce the raw material to support manufacturing. So agriculture and food security. Then energy sufficiency, power and petroleum products. Because a modern economy is driven with energy. And then we must improve our transportation infrastructure. And finally, drive industrialization, focusing on the small and medium-scale enterprises. So we launched, Mr. President launched the ERGP in April last year. We started implementing elements of it right from the last quarter of 2016. So we've been in implementation mode, even though it was formally launched only in April. And also the various intervention measures that we took under the SIP. So all that have already started yielding some results. Still small, but it's important to see the direction of movement. The SIP and the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. I will first look at the GDP growth rate, because I did speak about growth, that unless you can achieve growth, nothing else is possible. Now, if you look at the GDP, the growth rate, you will see from the slide that in 2014, when crude oil price started falling from $110, which was $110 in 2014 by the end of the first quarter, and it fell to less than $30 in 2016. And you can see the fall. But by the second quarter, we had had two quarters of negative growth. We were in a recession. Pumping out money, we borrowed, reflated the economy, and the results started showing. And as you can see, signs of recovery observed since the third quarter. And of 2017, we finally emerged from recession. Real GDP grew by 0.72% in the second quarter. By the third quarter, it had consolidated, growing by 1.4%. And agriculture grew by 3.06%, and industry grew by 8.83%. So it is clear that the measures that we are taking have started yielding results. But of course, 1.4% growth is very minimal growth. 3%. So 1.4% growth, you can't feel it. So, but however, the important thing is that we are seeing evidence that the steps we are taking are yielding some results. We're moving in the right direction. In 2018, and I will deal with that, our target is to achieve 3.5%. Then we can start to feel something. Our target for 2020 is 7%. Then we are growing. Beyond 2020, we can achieve up to 10%. I'm confident about that. One of the few countries I visited when I became minister was Ethiopia. Because Ethiopia has been growing at 10% for the last 5 years or more on the back of agriculture and light industry. Nigeria can also do it. So I believe that we can. I'm confident that we will. We just have to keep our eye on the fundamental things that we need to do, and I will deal with that shortly. One of the ways that you see whether people believe in what you are doing is confidence. When confidence starts to come back. What happened was that the decline was compounded by lack of confidence. So there was a capital flight. After we came out with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, and we rolled out our various policies. We went twice to the UK, the US, to the West, to talk to them about Nigeria, about what we were doing in Nigeria. It was on the back of trying to raise the Eurobond. They were very impressed by what we said. And when we went the second time, they were impressed by how we had sustained the promises and the commitments that we made. And you can see signs already in terms of capital importation. When people begin to believe in what you are doing, rather than money flowing out, it flows in. So if you look at the rate of capital importation in 2017, in the first quarter, it was $908 million US. By the second quarter, it was 1.7 trillion US dollars. By the third quarter, it had gone up to 4. Now, this is evidence that there is confidence coming back. And that confidence, you can see it in the stock market, which has been going up. A number of companies have had rights issues. Unilever, Union Bank, many of them with foreign shareholding, and they have been oversubscribed. If they tried that in 2016, they would have none of them would have succeeded. Because at that time, the confidence was at its lowest ebb. So confidence is coming back. There is belief in the direction of government programs and policies. You can also see that in the FX flows. Currently, we have reserves as of today of about 40 billion. Now, at the US dollars, which is significantly higher than when we came in as a government. And that shows the confidence. You can see the trend. It went, when the confidence was at its lowest ebb in September 2016, it went down to 23 billion US dollars. We rolled out our policies, and since then, it started going up. We've also been helped by the fact that crude oil prices have also been steady. But they're only $60, 60-something dollars. They used to be 110. So that alone doesn't account for it. But definitely it helps. Also, inflation. Inflation has been trending down. As of November 2017, it was 15.9%, and we expect that trend to continue. We're actually planning, and we intend that in 2018, it should get down to about 12%, and ultimately, by 2020, to single digits. That is our plan. And you can see that it's moving, the trend is moving in the right direction, the direction of our plans. Indeed, our projection for 2017 was about 15.8, 15.9. So we've actually achieved our projection for 2017. Also, the gap between exchange rates is narrowing, and you can see that from the graph. And something which is very important, because we said it's important that we are competitive. It's important that we create an environment where businesses can prosper. And one of the standards that is used worldwide is how easy is it to do business in your country? And so we looked at the World Bank Index and we targeted to move 20 places by the end of 2017. And so we worked together with the states. We looked at what are the various constraints to businesses. We looked at the ease of incorporating companies. We looked at our visas. We looked at the ease of getting land titles and so on. And we worked together with the states through the National Economic Council. My ministry provides a secretariat for the National Economic Council. We worked through it. And then we also set up a presidential council on ease of doing business, Enabling Business Council, headed by His Excellency, the Vice President. So working closely with the private sector, working closely with the states, we were really surprised because our target was 20 places up. When the list was actually released, we were 24 places up. And that means that we can achieve targets that we set for ourselves. We just have to believe in ourselves more. We set ourselves 20 places, we achieved 24 places. And most reassuring, Nigeria is rated as one of the top 10 reforming countries in the world by the World Bank. So people are taking notice of what we are doing. People are taking notice of the changes we are introducing. But even though the results are encouraging, as I said, growth is still fragile. As I said, 1.4% growth is not really the growth that any country should be boasting about. When your population is growing at 3%, 1.4% is really minimal. And so we have to work even harder. We're encouraged by the results, but it actually means that we are encouraged to work even harder, and we really have to, because growth is still fragile. Now, one of the tools that we're using to implement the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan is the annual budget, because the budget sets out the spending priorities, and government spending signals to the private sector the areas of priorities. And one of the things that the President did in bringing the budget office and planning together is to make sure that the budget is driven by the plan. So it's properly integrated, and you can see that when you go through our budgets. And to that extent, I would like to briefly talk about the 2018 budget. You will recall that I did say that one of our priorities is agriculture. That is agriculture, very important. And in the ERGP, we set out a number of objectives to support the integrated transformation of the agriculture sector, to boost productivity by facilitating access to inputs, financing, water supply, extension services, and so on, and to use irrigable land and river basin infrastructure to enable year-round agricultural production. To support that, in the 2018 budget proposal, which is currently before the National Assembly, we provided 25.1 billion naira for promotion and development of value chain across 30 different commodities. Indeed, for agriculture, we propose over 100 billion naira, which is really the largest, the highest amount that has ever been spent by any federal government on agriculture. And over 50, and then water resources as well. Over 50 billion for water supply, reparation of dams, irrigation projects nationwide, because you need water to support agriculture. Then energy. I'm taking us through our key execution priorities. So energy self-sufficiency. There's a lot of reform that is going on in the oil and gas. We are in the petroleum industry. We have already implementing a new funding mechanism for joint venture operations to ensure that we devote enough resources to growing the oil industry. Because even though we want to move away from reliance on the oil industry, it is the resources of the oil industry that will actually help us in the short term to grow the other sectors, so that as we grow those other sectors, we will rely less on the oil industry. But in the short term, we need to maximize our returns from the oil industry. So the new funding mechanism is to ensure that we achieve our target. And our target in the oil industry is to move our production from 2.2 million barrels a day to 2.5 million barrels a day. But we want to increase production, but we also want to increase the amount the government take. So we're reviewing the fiscal regime for the production sharing contracts. That has already come to Federal Executive Council, has been approved. It's going to require legislation which is being prepared and which will be submitted to the National Assembly. We also want to optimize derivable benefits from oil by restructuring government's equity in our joint venture assets. What we want to do is, right now we have an average about 57% ownership in our upstream assets. We want to bring that down to 40%. That will do two things. One, it will free up resources which can be used for our road infrastructure, our rail infrastructure. At the same time, it will improve efficiencies. We discovered that in the LNG. Now, one of the things I did I used to be a member of the LNG Working Committee at the time we started the LNG program. So I'm very familiar with it. At that time, government insisted on having 60%, and there was no progress. In the end, government decided to come and take a minority interest. So we came down from 60% to 49%. And in doing this, we also ceded the operatorship to Shell. Initially, the first 2 or 3 MDs, Shell brought expatriates from Holland, but the last 3 or 4 MDs have all been Nigerians. And that singular decision transformed the LNG company. That singular decision created an LNG company that has been one of the most successful investments the federal government has ever made. It produces every year dividends. We want that format, that structure, which works so well for the LNG. We want to replicate it in other upstream ventures so as to create the same environment. And so that is why we're doing the restructuring. It's been announced, it was in the president's budget speech, and we intend to achieve it. And we'll free up a lot of resources which will be used for rail, which will be used for the road infrastructure. We also want to increase power generation by optimizing non-operational capacity, encouraging small-scale projects. We want to optimize existing installed 7,000 megawatts capacity. Our aim is to achieve 10,000 megawatts. Optimize capacity by 2020. So one of the challenges that we met in the electricity sector, the power sector, is that we met a situation in which it had been privatized, but some of the companies to which it had been privatized are not so strong. But we decided, let us not reverse. Let us see how we can strengthen the system, how we can improve the system. You know, as a country, we're always reversing things. something has been done, take it and improve on it, rather than always reversing things. And that has been the attitude of this government. We look at it and say, okay, how can we improve it? How can we strengthen it? And the key thing is to ensure the financial viability of all the sectors of electricity supply and distribution. And one of the ways of doing that is to support NBET with resources so they can guarantee GENCOs that whatever they produce will be paid for, even if there are delays in collecting from the discos. And so we're supporting the NBET with resources. And one of the things which I will show you in the 2018 budget, we're providing 194 billion for NBET, to support NBET, to let people know that if they invest in power generation, they will be paid. They will be paid, and they'll be paid on time. And that will encourage them to invest. Then we are also trying to ensure that the discos are viable. And they have a lot of debt. Some of those debts come from the government itself and from MDAs. So we're providing some funds to MDAs to make sure that they can meet their debt to the discos. So in this way, we're trying to ensure the financial viability of the power sector. So as you can see, we have in the 2018 budget 9.8 billion for Mambila hydropower project to produce electricity, 12 billion counterpart funding for transmission lines, 10.15 billion for rural electrification access program, and so on. And then, as I indicated already, 194 billion to NBET to bridge funding gap for electricity value chain, and 10 billion to support MDAs to pay their electricity bills. The budget, actually, every MDA is required to budget for the electricity bills. So this 10 billion is just to supplement. They're all required to budget for the electricity bills. Then of the extra priorities that I mentioned, I did mention transport. So we're investing massively in transport infrastructure, in road, rail, air, and water. And some of the budgetary provisions is for the counterpart funding for the railway project. The railway project is a project that this government is committed to. And we're discussing with the Chinese to raise loans for the railway project. The president's dream is that every major town, at least every state capital, should be connected to the railway. And that we should work on two fronts. One, a standard gauge rail that will connect all the major cities. In addition, we should revamp the existing narrow gauge, because we can use that for freight. And so we're discussing with General Electric to revamp and concession to them the existing Lagos to Kano, as well as Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. So that is ongoing. And as a result of that, that is why you see the amount that we have allocated for the railway as our own counterpart funding. And then, of course, for the airports as well, because we want to ensure that all road, rail, air, water, that we revamp all our transport modes. Because when we were investing in agriculture, we realized, and all the studies have shown, that a lot of the produce, the produce that farmers generate, a lot of it is wasted, is lost, because of high transport costs or not being able to get the produce to the market. So transport is very, very important. Sometimes when people ask, you say your agriculture is number one, but you're investing more in transport. Yes, because without transport, you can't support agriculture. Indeed, without transport, you can't support any of the others. You can't support education. People have to go go to school through a road. You can't support health. So transport, so the infrastructure is really very important. I recall when I was chairman of the Appropriation Committee of the Senate some years back, the then Minister of Finance, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, invited the Chinese finance minister. And one of the questions that we asked him was, we're impressed by what China is doing. What are the 3 things that you think that we can do if we want to grow at the rate that China is growing? He said 3 things. He said, yes, just the 3, so that we can focus on the 3 most important. He said, okay, so that is easy. Number 1 is infrastructure. We noted that. So what about number 2? He said, infrastructure. What about number 3? He said, infrastructure. That anything else you want to do, if you do not fix your infrastructure, forget about everything else. And that once you fix your infrastructure, it's now possible to grow the others, to grow your agriculture, to grow your manufacturing. Because why isn't manufacturing growing? Because of our infrastructure, because of the cost. Just by way of illustration, I was on the board of Unilever, and we on the board asked them, why is close-up toothpaste more expensive in Lagos than it is in Malaysia? In fact, much more expensive. And they said to us that they gave us a breakdown. And it turned out that the greatest cost in component wasn't power, which we thought was the problem. It wasn't even power. It was getting the raw materials to Agbara, and Agbara is not that far from the port. Basically, it costs you more money to bring a raw material from, say, Thailand to the port, the Tinkan Island or Apapa port. It costs you less than it costs to take it from Tinkan Island to Agbara. So these are the costs that it costs you, so that it is those costs that have jacked up the cost of materials produced in Nigeria. So if you can tackle that infrastructure, tackle those costs, it will bring down substantially, and it will make us much more competitive. That is why we're spending the amount of money on our infrastructure, on our transport infrastructure, on our power infrastructure. Talking about our transport infrastructure, we are devoting in the 2018 budget 295 billion for the construction and rehabilitation of major roads nationwide. Now, you should, just by way of comparison, in 2015, before we came in, the amount allocated for roads nationwide by the federal government was 18 billion naira. So that shows you we have moved from 18 to 295 billion. However, that is not enough. What we require is about 10 times this. That is what we require. And so it is very important that we look at ways of bringing in the private sector, getting private sector funding for many of our roads. PPP, and we're looking at that. We already have an arrangement for the road to the Apapa port, which I spoke about as a major cost factor in Nigerian production. We already have the private sector. I believe Dangote is involved in that, in helping to fix that road. And we're giving tax credits for companies that are willing to support infrastructure. We also have a similar project in Bonny, the Bonny-Bodo Road, which you have the Bonny LNG involved in. And we are talking with companies. We have a productivity commission, council, which includes private sector players. And we're sitting down and talking with them. Which road can they help us with? We will give tax credits and all that, because we find that when the private sector is involved and they're funding roads, the cost comes down substantially. I mean, that is the truth. The cost comes down. And it's simple. Because you see, when you're using your own money, and let me give an illustration from, I think it's Friedman, an American economist. I don't always agree with him, Milton Friedman. But he gave 3 examples of 3 different kinds of expenditure. He said that there is an expenditure in which you are spending somebody else's money on somebody else. Say, for instance, a minister is doing low-cost housing in which he will never live. The money is not his. He's not going to live in the house. So generally, and that is human nature, he will not be concerned about the cost because it's not coming from his pocket. He's not concerned about the quality because he won't live there. That is one example. Second example is when you are spending somebody else's money on yourself. That's a minister. He's furnishing, he's been told that government will furnish his house for him. And that wanted to bring furniture. He would ask for the catalog, he would check the quality, he would check the fabric, he would check every single thing. He will be concerned about the cost. It's not his money. But he'll be concerned about the quality because he is going to use it. The third is when the minister, having retired, is now building a house in his village in which he wants to furnish it. He will sit down there with the contractor. How many bags of cement we use for this? He will query every single item of cost. He'll also want high quality because he'll be staying there. So it's just human nature. So the more we can move our expenditure into the third category, that's why I keep on talking about the private sector. The more we can move our expenditure to the third category, the higher the quality, the lower the cost. I mean, it's just human nature. It's everywhere in the world. There was a study done by in the U.S., American Armed Forces, in terms of some of the things that they were buying. And it was found that they were spending $1,000 on toilet seats. That is America. Government purchasing. You know, so it's just it is not a Nigerian phenomenon. And so what we have to do, rather than working against, is look at how we can bring in the private sector more in providing some of these services so that competition will bring down the cost. Those are the sorts of things that we have to do. And so that is why, apart from the fact that we don't even have the money, why bringing in the private sector to provide a number of these services will actually help us to bring down the cost and to improve the quality. Then industrialization. We're accelerating the implementation of the National Industrial Revolution Plan. I did say that as a government, our philosophy is not to jettison what we inherited, it's to build on what we inherited. We should stop this practice of everything the previous government you jettison. No, we build on it. The Industrial Revolution Plan, we just said, okay, let us fine-tune it. It is there because development is a continuum. We must build, we must improve. And the fact of the matter is that over the years, we have had some very good plans. It's just the quality of implementation has really been very bad. So you look at what is good from the past, you build on it. You can jettison the ones that don't work. Then I'll just mention the special economic zones. We've allocated $46.39 billion for ongoing and planned special economic zone projects across the geopolitical zones. And we're also reintroducing the Export Expansion Grant. I did speak about social intervention programs, including homegrown school feeding program, government economic empowerment program. The SIP is something that I could talk about for an hour. It requires so that I could let you know what we are doing. But the important thing is that this is unprecedented. It shows our focus on trying to make sure that our growth is inclusive. And then, of course, we're spending money on regional interventions and sustainable development goals. Now, with regards to the ERGP implementation, I'd just like to mention that since implementation has always been the major problem, we have set up an implementation unit in the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. And that unit is to closely monitor the implementation of the critical initiatives, periodically evaluate implementation progress, and provide early warning signals. And one of the things that we are doing, I spoke about the private sector, bringing in the private sector. We're organizing special ERGP-focused labs. We're trying to replicate what they did in Malaysia, which was a successful transformation. We're trying to replicate it here. So we have identified 3 areas: agriculture and transportation. The link, I think, should be obvious now why we put the 2 together. Power and gas, manufacturing and processing. Right now, we're already preparing the pre-lab work. By February, we should be able to start the labs. We will bring in private sector participants, both locally and internationally. We will sit down in a room. The ministers will be there. They will tell us what their constraints are. Our job is to remove those constraints, so that at the end of it, we will come out with MOUs in which they will commit to which sectors they're going to invest in and what support they want from government. Government has to get involved, but government is not the one to actually do it. So our job is to provide this environment. So the labs are a mechanism through which we will be achieving this. You'll be hearing much more about the labs. Some of you will be invited to participate in those labs. So in conclusion, what is our outlook? How do I see 2018? I'm very, very positive about 2018. I'm much more relaxed now than I've ever been. When I came in, I was under stress. The situation was stressful. Now I'm a little bit more optimistic. I can see that we are coming out of the difficulties. I can see that the future is promising. I'm not the only one who sees this. The World Bank, the IMF, the rating agencies, they all project significant improvements in Nigeria's economic performance in 2018. Everybody projects it. But projecting gives the environment, but you and I have to work at it. Government has to work at it. So Nigeria presents investment opportunities, particularly in agriculture, in agro-processing, industry, mining, construction, and services. If you have land in the village, anywhere, that nothing is not being used for anything, get your relatives, even if you cannot go back yourself. Let them grow something there. The market for instance, bananas. The Nigerian bananas are loved. People don't know that internationally. We produce some of the best bananas. Our granuts. I recall when I mistakenly took some granuts to the US, and I gave them out. My brother gave them out at a party he was having, and people just loved it. Nigerian groundnuts do not need salt, whereas the groundnuts you get in the US without salt is tasteless. But Nigerian groundnuts. So we have potential. So go into it. Bananas, groundnuts, anything. There is so much potential in this country. And that potential is why our outlook for 2018 is so positive. Our target is to have a real GDP growth rate of 3.5% this year and 7% by 2020. Our target is to achieve 2.3 million barrels of crude oil production this year, with 2.5 in 2020. Our target in agriculture is an average growth rate of 6.9%. Our target is self-sufficiency in major food items such as rice. Our target is to bring inflation rate down to single digits by 2020. Our target is 10 gigawatts of operational electricity capacity by 2020. Our target is manufacturing sector average growth rate of 8.5%. There are, of course, downside risk, and there always are. But we are making efforts to mitigate those downside risks. One of the downside risks is insecurity. We are making efforts to minimize it, to tackle it head on, to maintain peace in the Niger Delta region. Because ultimately, we believe that we can. We believe that working together, all of us, we can build a country that we are proud of, a country where we grow what we eat, we consume what we make, we produce what we use, and enough extra for export. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Those of you who followed the publicity regarding this event know that we had indicated that there will be two key speeches, and then before we get into the breakout sessions. And the idea was to have the minister bring the official perspective to it, and then have someone else knowledgeable in these matters also then bring a market perspective. But we were also careful to make it someone, because in this thing, especially very often when you haven't had the opportunity of looking at things from an inside track, sometimes it sounds all very, you can be very academic in, propounding theories about what needs to be done and what is possible without really. And we therefore thought to get someone who's been on the inside and now outside to bring that perspective. And we had picked Professor Chukwuma Soludo to do so. But yesterday, as I was then tracking him to be sure that he was, to get the logistics for getting him here this morning, realized that due to some communication, indeed, he had a scheduling challenge and was involved in something else today and couldn't make it. And you can imagine the confusion and the. But then, thank God, when you have faithful friends in different areas, you can call on them. At that short notice last night, I called on Professor Kingsley Moalu. And, he's had to juggle his, itinerary for today. He had a radio, appearance on Earth this morning. He's traveling this afternoon, but, he agreed to. Professor Kingsley Chedumoalu, a political economist, lawyer, and former United Nations official. He's a professor of practice in international business and public policy at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University in the United States of America. He was previously the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria from 2009 to 2014, serving as Deputy Governor for Financial Stability and Deputy Governor for Operations. He was a member of the Board of Directors, the Monetary Policy of the CBN, the Monetary Policy Committee, and the Committee of Governors of the CBN, and was also a member of Nigeria's economic management team during that period. He is the founder of Sogato Strategies LLC, an emerging markets risk strategy and macroeconomic advisory firm, and a senior advisor of the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum. He's a contributory editor of Central Banking Journal. In 2016, Moalu founded the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation, a think tank focused on the achievement of inclusive economic growth and effective public policy in developing countries. See that phrase again, inclusive economic growth, which the minister talked about. So we have in the house, so to say, an expert in how to deliver inclusive economic growth. Professor Moalu holds a degree in law from the University of Nigeria in Nsukka and was called to the Nigerian bar. Seems to be a day of lawyers. But he also obtained an MA degree at the Fletcher School of Law of Diplomacy at Tufts University, where he was the John Gillespie Fellow and Research Assistant in the International Political Economy Program, and obtained a Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, in International Relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science, University of London, United Kingdom. Join me as we welcome Professor Moalu to share his thoughts with us.
Good morning. Honorable Minister of National Planning, Senator Odo Doma, my brother Ben Akabweze, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is the most emergency keynote address I've given in my life. But let me tell you, I will not disappoint you. But since, as Ben said, he called me very late last night, and I already had my schedules this morning coming from one of them, it just means that the modality of what I'm going to say, the shape and nature of it, will have to be adjusted to the circumstances in which I find myself. And so you'll forgive me if I'm not able to speak so directly to the specific issues that the minister has raised, since I did not have time to study his presentation. But I was whispering to the minister, and I warned him that I'm going to say what I whispered to him privately, publicly, that I wish all these fine ideas and targets had been set and started on May 29, 2015. You see, enough. You do. You see, our job as citizens is to hold our governments accountable. We should not shy away from it. We're helping the government, and when we do so, to perform better. We're helping ourselves and our country to do better. So I commend the minister. He's a very fine gentleman and someone I've known for many years when I was at the central bank. And, he's worked very hard, very obviously, and very committed Nigerian, you're seeing, in a committed Nigerian that we have in Senator Udodoma. So some of the things I'm going to say should not be taken personal at all. But I, as a citizen, I am just not satisfied with the management of the Nigerian economy. The reason, and I want to say that the shortcoming in the management of the Nigerian economy stems from something that is not economic at all. It stems from politics. It is the leadership failure of our political class that has left the Nigerian economy comatose for many, many years. That problem it preceded the current administration. Let's be clear. But in my view, it kind of got worse in the last 2 or 3 years because there was quite a lot of inertia in the beginning. First of all, the formation of the cabinet took a very long time. And so when people come into a post, people like the minister, they have to settle down. Maybe you give them 3-6 months and then they get to speed. So that's 1 year off already. And so some of these targets, when he said, for example, we are going to do some things or start some things in February I don't know whether it was 2018 or February 2019. Because if it's February 2019, then, of course, all the citizens have to say, well, we hope you come back to be able to do it. Now, I just want to make some general comments about economic management and to give some advice, in my view, as to where we should be going as a country. You see, number one is that no country can develop economically faster than the competence or incompetence of its political leadership. That is number one. The reason is this, because I say it from personal experience. Ben mentioned that I was deputy governor of the central bank, which of course everybody knows, and I was also in the economic management team from 2012. The problem we have in this country is our politicians. If technocrats, there are many brilliant technocrats in Nigeria, and when you create the opportunity for them, they do come up with very brilliant ideas and brilliant solutions. But the problem is that when they do that, they often are overridden or suppressed by subjective political considerations or by vested interests. And so I am just being very honest in my view that I have come to the conclusion that it's not about how many economists we have or don't have in Nigeria that is the problem. It's about whether we actually have leaders. We have lots of politicians, some of whom actually go by the title leader. But there's a difference between politics and leadership. And politics in a democracy is only a path to leadership. So the economy of Nigeria in this context then, where are we today and where should we be going? Nigeria today is in a very massive state of economic compression that has taken place in the last 2 or 3 years. But the problem did not start in the last 2 or 3 years. The problem is that we have allowed Nigeria's economy over the last 50 years to depend on fiscal life support from oil. And so we've spent many decades in this country worshiping the gods of small things. The oil price. Nigeria's leaders wake up in the morning and they're watching the oil price. The oil price is going back up, and some people are actually happy or relieved. And I'm just shaking my head. And all of this is why I made a personal decision to say, look, I've had enough personal distinctions in my life. I really don't care anymore. What matters is what happens to Nigerians. And I decided to come back home and set up the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation as my own direct contribution to educating our people on the basics of economics and governance, so that we can hold our governments accountable. So the economy today has gone through a very big shock, and it will take us many years to recover from what happened. Starting from all the 40, 50 years that we've been depending on oil. Other countries were producing oil. They made a lot of money from oil. What did they do? They began to set up sovereign wealth funds, starting from the 60s into the 70s. Countries were setting up sovereign wealth funds. What was the next thing they did? They moved heavily into refining oil. And so some of them were making more money from refined oil sales than from crude petroleum products. Where was Nigeria? We came to the Sovereign Wealth Party in 2013 after the party was all over. And today, we have $1.5 billion or $2 billion in our Sovereign Wealth Fund. Well, if you're starting from ground zero, that's progress. But what could have been, I think. So the question then is, what can be? How do we create a new and different future? The Nigerian economy requires a philosophical framework. It doesn't have one. Hasn't had one in a long time. And if it doesn't have a philosophical framework, if there's no worldview that is driving economic policy and strategy, we're going to have a series of transactions that are laudable in and of themselves, but will not change our quality of life. There's a big difference between economic growth statistics and economic development and economic transformation. These are three things that have to happen for a country to actually make progress economically. Economic growth in GDP, in the GDP context, we all know when the value of goods and production and all that goes up, the statistics can tick up. But any GDP growth upward trajectory, including the oil price or oil-related things, which is also happening in Nigeria today. But that doesn't create any jobs. Then you have economic development, which is the quality of life of the citizens of any country. What's the state of your health care? What's the state of your education? Where is your life expectancy? Where is your infrastructure? The minister talked a lot about infrastructure, and I commend him and the government for the focus on infrastructure. But I'm saying that focus must take place in a new and very different context for the results that they want ultimately to be achieved. Because the fact of the matter is this: we are rated 187 out of 189 countries in the world in healthcare. That's just the cold fact. I'm sorry, I'm not here to be politically correct. We have poverty of up to 60% in this country, and some would say that's a conservative statistics. We have 4,000 megawatts of power for a country of 180 million people. South Africa, which is 50 million, has 40,000 megawatts. Brazil, which is 210 million people, has 120,000 megawatts of electricity. We have almost 15 million kids out of school age, the highest such population in the world. Therefore, the point I'm trying to make is not to paint a picture of gloom, but a picture of reality. So that when we understand the reality in which we are, rather than celebrating, every little step forward, but ignoring the 10 steps backwards that we tend to take in this country, we focus on a holistic approach to economic development and economic transformation. That requires a different philosophical mindset. It requires a very clear worldview. Where are we as Nigeria? What's the difference? What's the distance between our society and several others that we started this development journey with, like Malaysia? Malaysia is a very important example because we know that consultants from Malaysia are now here to help us or coming to help us. But I know there was a time when we were at the same place or better off, even on the same par with South Korea. At independence, many people felt Nigeria would become the Japan of Africa. So I think we need to understand things in this context so that we can actually transform our economy. Then you now move into the question, when you talk about economic development, which is how do you provide good healthcare, good education, and life expectancy and so on. Then you talk about, the point in that is that, and I want to make that comment to the minister, there needs to be a massive focus on social infrastructure in this country. Number one. Number two, we need a massive focus on mental infrastructure. We've heard people tell you about stomach infrastructure. But as I've always said in recent times, the only thing it guarantees you is a trip to the toilet. You need mental infrastructure which builds sustainable development. And we need to invest in creating that mental infrastructure. And that means that building the skills and knowledge in the Nigerian economy to drive an innovation-driven economy that is sustainable is job number one. Because that is what will create jobs. I did not talk about the millions of people who are unemployed, 30 million today. How do you get 25 million of these people back into the job market? 27, 28. Many countries, there will always be some tiny group of people that may not have jobs. So we cannot always totally wipe out unemployment, but we can make it, we can crush it. So this requires a whole new different set of thinking, and we have to be very clear what our national economic vision is. What type of society economically is Nigeria? What is the balance between the state and the marketplace? That's the problem we have been having so far. We haven't found that balance very well. In some governments, some of which I might have been more familiar with, it was like everything private sector, but the government abdicated its responsibility to provide the guiding light, and cronies and oligarchs took over in the guise of private sector. That is an abdication of the responsibility of the state. In some other governments, the state looked as if it was trying to reverse all that and to be and determine the market. That's again failure. It can't work. So none of these two extremes works. You have to find the right balance. That balance is that a capable state must prepare and provide a roadmap. That means every man and his uncle, every woman and her aunt in the world today are capitalists. But why is it that capitalism has made Western countries and many Asian countries rich, but no African country, with one or two exceptions, has been able to truly develop on the basis of capitalism? The reason is because in our economic management, we have not philosophically interrogated capitalism and how to adapt it to our society. There are three things you need for capitalism to make you a wealthy nation. I'm talking about the wealth of nations. I'm not talking about the wealth of Dangote. And that's just a manner of speaking, not about the individual, but about, very successful and well-driven entrepreneurs who have made money in Nigeria and are making money. And that's okay. They have the right to do so. But I am talking about the wealth of individuals versus the wealth of nations. And that is my focus as a political economist. How do you transform nations? How do you take millions from poverty to the middle class? That's what China did over 30 years. 500 million people. That's what Rwanda is doing today. About 2 million people have been taken from poverty verifiably and measurably. From poverty into the middle class. That requires a certain type of political leadership. In my view, going forward into the future in Nigeria, it requires a technocratically competent political leadership. I'm sorry. That's just the truth. Our political class has failed us. That's my position. So, the three conditions for successful capitalism are as follows. You must have property rights. you must have property rights. Capitalism is a philosophy. It's founded on property, private property rights and exchange. Today in Nigeria and in many African countries, do we have property rights? It's very abridged. All land is owned by the state. You have the Land Use Act. Nigeria can never know the wealth of nations until the Land Use Act is abolished. Take that to the bank. Take that to the bank. Why? Because when individuals can hold land in freehold, what they can do with it is much more. In terms of their ability to access credit, in terms of the ability of innovative thinking to come. If you're just on a certificate of occupancy for a limited amount of time, you don't own the land. And what you can do with it, the bureaucracy alone that is involved in getting the C of O, and what it does to the possibilities for investment in a country of 180 million people. I leave you to do the math. Number 2, you need innovation for capitalism to create national wealth. We have many brilliant young people in Nigeria today. They're innovating. When they innovate, we see the picture in the papers. We see it on TV. After that, Piam, you won't see it again. But in other countries where we all visit, you see the innovation. Next thing, you see it on the shelves in a market as products in the private marketplace. So innovation matters. And innovation is an ecosystem. It's about the person that innovates, but it's about that innovation becoming a new way of doing things that everybody uses in the market, either as a process or as a product. But in Nigeria, people innovate, but there's no pipeline to the market. I saw somebody who manufactured what they call the Nepalese iron. I saw it somewhere. A young Nigerian, brilliant guy. Now, tell me, if that is not a brilliant innovation, what do you need in Nigeria more than a Nepalese iron? But that is true. But I haven't seen the Nepalese iron anywhere. The iron in my house, I still need electricity to run it and iron my clothes. So if we had a proper innovation economy, this young man that invented the Nepalese iron, at least for as long as we don't have good NEPA, the man will be one of the wealthiest Nigerians. And there will be a chain of people employed in his industry. So, innovation matters. It is the secret, in fact, of the prosperity of the modern world. Most of the world was poor until about 300-400 years ago. The only people who were wealthy were the kings and the nobility and the landed gentry, even in Europe. But it was the Industrial Revolution. It was the new explosion of inventions. And from those inventions, venture capital came. All those inventors had backers. As they invent, their products are now mass-produced, put into the market. But their intellectual property rights were job number 1. In the United States Constitution, one of the very first articles is about the protection of intellectual property, mental infrastructure. It matters. So I'm trying to say that this is the level at which we really have to begin, so that we are not like children who take a bath. They'll tell you, Daddy, Mommy, we've taken a bath. You come into the bathroom and check. They just wash their stomach. We shouldn't be that type of country. So, innovation, number 2. Then number 3 is capital. You can't be a successful capitalist economy without capital. Why don't we have capital in many African countries, including Nigeria? Because our taxation system is weak. So we're not able to generate capital internally. So we have to have these foundations right. And then in the economic management team, we say this is the philosophy that is guiding Nigeria. There are 4 types of capitalism. There is entrepreneurial capitalism, which fits into a lot in our culture here, especially women who are very enterprising, market women in our villages and our communities, and just a young man or woman working hard to set up something new. That's what built the economy of the United States. Entrepreneurial capitalism, entrepreneurship. You have welfare capitalism, where the state is trying to balance the rough edges of the capitalist market. You have state capitalism, which China has now invented and sold to us. But for you to have a state capitalism, you must have a very capable state. Then you have the fourth, crony capitalism, which you see a lot in Russia and you see a lot in Nigeria. My cronies, they will all get rich. But so we have to make a decision about which of these four types of capitalism, or the mixtures of which ones that we are using in Nigeria. We are not clear. You see a government trying to become a welfare government. But for you to become to create a welfarist government, you need to create a proper social security system. I am afraid 5,000 naira to somebody a month is not welfarism. It's not. So my suggestion to the government is that they should now use a capitalist way which will have multiple results to help people who are out of a job. Scrap that 500 billion naira in the budget for N-Power or whatever it's called. Yeah? Take it, create a venture capital fund. Call the private sector and say, look, bring another 500 billion matching. We are invested in this venture capital fund. This venture capital fund will now be 1 trillion. We, the government, will not manage it, but we are investing and we will make our returns. Because if we start managing it, federal character will come in. It's not going to be the quality of your business case that will determine whether you're venture funded, but whether you're Igbo, Hausa, or Yoruba, all those things will come in. So the government should just invest and let the fund be run by the private sector partners. I'm telling you very practical things. Today in Nigeria, Farm Crowdy, there's a company called Farm Crowdy. Yeah, small company. They've just gotten nice 1 million investment from venture capital. Very interesting. They help you participate in agriculture, as they say, without lifting a hoe. So they fund the smallholder farmers. And the profits are split as follows. The venture capital investors get 40%. Farm Crowdy gets 40%. The farmer gets 20%. The farmer has put no capital other than his skill and his work. Everybody is happy. Jobs in the world are created like this by private enterprises, small and business enterprises, SMEs, many of them founded or funded by venture capital, and then the second stage, private equity. This is what the government of Nigeria should do. Instead of saying they're giving people 5,000 naira a month because they have no jobs. That will do nothing. You finish that in 2 days. Or 1 day. So our leadership needs to begin to lead. Not just to be engaging in motions for the sake of activity or to be seen to be doing something, but to be achieving transformational outcomes. So this question of the venture capital, and this will now begin to create jobs as new businesses are set up and people are employing people. This is one way. Another way, of course, is that we need to reform our education system. We come back again to mental infrastructure. We must create people who are skilled for the 21st century types of economy. Right now, our educational system is not in that configuration. So let me just round up by saying that it's very important that we subject the economic management of Nigeria to a totally fundamental, philosophical, and conceptual overhaul. I say it that if you cannot conceive it, you cannot demonstrate it or achieve it. But in Nigeria, they will tell you, don't blow grammar. Tell me the practical. And that's why we're nowhere. Because we say we are quote-unquote practical. We're engaged in transactions that have no transformative impact. And year in, year out, our people are still poor. So let us, when we want to look at nations like Malaysia, and you find that Mahathir Mohamad had a very robust worldview. They had a vision 2020 or whatever they had, but there was a very clear philosophical thing behind it, and they were monitoring the implementation. So I'm happy when the minister says they've set up an an implementation unit for EPRG in his office. But the problem is that I believe that the real implementation unit should have been in the office of the president. Why? Because the minister is just one branch of the government. You need a system-wide focus on strategy and the discipline of execution of government policy. So these are improvements that can be made, but I'm going in a particular direction. And it's not too late. The future, it can be very different. We are growing in leaps and bounds in terms of our population in this country. And if we do not fundamentally change the way we do business, by 2050, when the projections are that we will be 400 million Nigerians, we may find that we're eating each other. And with the number of young people that are going into unemployment, what is the future? So it's a time bomb we're sitting on. So people need to think. If you don't want to think, engage people who can think and make sure you give them a free hand. Don't engage them to think, and when they finish thinking, you carry the product of their thinking and put on a shelf. And then go into a political meeting at night and make decisions that are totally contrary to what those people came up with. These are the problems we have in Nigeria today. So at the end of the day, as they say in German accents, the whole thing is politics. That is the problem. And so I am saying that the citizens of Nigeria need to wake up. They need to hold our political leaders accountable for how they manage the economy. There must be political consequences for economic failure. I talked about how they've held our economy hostage to, just the worship of the god of small things, oil price. The next thing was that in a particular period, we had oil at $100 a barrel for several years. No savings. No savings. Obasanjo's government left 22 billion in the excess crude account. You can question and discuss the constitutionality of the ECA. That's not what I'm here to do. The fact was that there was a savings. Some people blew that money over several years, over 4, 5, 6 years. That money went from 22 billion to the end of 2014, the ECA had only 2 billion. Because our politicians, I come back to them, said, what are you saving for? You're saving for the rainy day. The rain is already beating us. Bring out this money. We have to provide infrastructure. This is the type of thinking that governs this country. And you think you're going to make progress. So, they blew the money. The current government came in. The oil price was going down. But then the current government themselves made a number of fundamental errors that worsened the problem. And that error began with the central bank. About how the naira was managed. The naira was subjected to politics, to vested interests. We're poorer today because of it. The independence of the bank that I worked in, I know the central bank I worked in. The independence of the central bank. I don't want to say too much. Anyway, let me just wrap up by thanking my brother and friend, Bernard Kabweze, for giving me the singular honor and privilege at very short notice. But it's the spirit of brotherhood that made him remember me. And it is the spirit of brotherhood that made me answer him. I'm not a member of his party. I'm not a member of any party, but we're still brothers. So, and we're all working for the interest of our country. The minister is my brother. I'm not from Akwa Ibom or Cross River, but we're brothers, good friends, and we respect each other. He's a great man. Everybody knows that. But his greatness does not take away the truth of what I'm saying. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
I think there's a conspiracy. There's a conspiracy. I have about 100 cards here for questions. But let me tell you something. About 95 of them were questions that Professor Mogalu asked and, directed his talk to. So I say there's a conspiracy. The people here have met with Professor Mogalu, ensured that Professor Soludo was held in Abuja. And, about 10 o'clock last night, when Pastor Ben called me to say Professor Soludo won't be able to come, for about 20 minutes, we were coming up with all sorts of solutions. And then all of a sudden, he saw Professor Mogalu on the TV, and then, so I agreed that there was a conspiracy. There was a conspiracy. There was a conspiracy to just ensure Professor Mogalu showed on the TV, and then he's here, and then he's delivering the message. Thank you very much, Prof. Apt message. Thank you very much. There are 4 questions, though, that I was able to pick out. I think those people were absent from that meeting. So I'll just read these questions, and if Professor Mogalu and the Honorable Minister have mics, I think there's one here. I've just identified 4 questions that you will just respond to. One is, in the budget, this person wants to be clear about the plan to reverse the impact of environmental issues. And I'm just summarizing environmental issues. Another question says that, can we reverse the 30% for infrastructure, 70%, can we reverse it? That is, can we make it 70% infrastructure, 30% recurrent? And I know, well, I won't answer, but I'll leave it to. And he says that it was done in some state, but I'll just leave it at that. This other question says, can we, the savings, and Professor Mogalu referred to this, but the savings we're currently making from the excess of crude, to the extent that it has gone up now, is it going to impact the borrowings of government, as we see? And then this one is also apt. I mean, one of the things that I've learned from Professor Mogalu today, 3 things that we've learned. One is land. One is there's an infrastructure word that has been properly used. Mental infrastructure. I mean, people shouldn't reduce us to stomach infrastructure. Mental infrastructure. And I picked out this question because it says that, is there a plan to support the private sector in investments in the education sector? And I'm sure that will impact mental infrastructure. I mean, for Nigerians, the amount of gray matter we bring to this world, we should be talking about mental infrastructure and mental development. So those are the 4 questions that if the minister could, address. And many of the other questions, or some of the other, many questions on Agric. Immediately after this session, we will break into the first 4 breakout sessions. Agric will hold here. We've left this place for Agric because we expect that will be a big one. Infrastructure will hold on the ground floor. Solid minerals will hold on the 3rd floor. Capital and fundraising for SMEs will hold on the 5th floor. So many of the issues that the minister and Professor Mogalu have addressed would also be taking at this deep dive sessions. But I'll call on the minister to attend to these 4 issues that we've raised.
Thank you very much. Let me thank Professor Mogalu. at very short notice, as he said. When I was listening to him, I was thinking about the process that we went through in developing the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. All that he said was said. All. There's nothing new in part of the discussion and the debate in coming up with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Many of the things he said are the fundamental problems. And we took all those things into account about innovation, about capital. All those things were discussed extensively because we had extensive consultation. And we had many people like him, and I would like him to be part of what we're doing. So that is the process. It is a part of the process. So that the things were taken on board, and I'm sure when he goes through the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, he will see that there is a vision. The vision arises out of all those things that he indicated. There is a vision of moving away from dependence on crude oil. There is a vision of driving innovation. There is a vision of creating jobs through the private sector. All those things are there. Indeed, the problem of Nigeria has not been the lack of thinking about these issues. If you go back and look at the 2020, even the one that's the NEEDS program that Professor Soludo developed working with the Obasanjo administration, many of those issues were there. The problem in Nigeria really is not that we don't know we know our problems. It is the implementation. It is actually implementing and solving those problems. That is the big challenge that we have. And so I welcome all those who have contributions to make. This government and my approach has been extremely receptive. Anybody who has any contribution to make is welcome. Come on, let us work together. That is why we are doing the labs. And it is February next month, not 2019, for clarity. And in the labs, we will bring in everybody. You will bring in the investors, the government. Let us sit down and let us see how do we actualize all these ideas that we have. You know, we all criticize, and I criticize as well, so I'm not saying we all do. That is as Nigerians. However, how do we translate those things to actual, actionable programs? That is always the challenge. And we welcome all the support. The issues of political leadership and all those are not issues, those are different issues. Basically, no, I mean, he said about the political leadership that got us up to 2014, all our savings went and all that. I don't want to dwell on that. Those are things that we know. What I would like us to focus on is going forward, is how do we move forward? And all hands should be on deck. Nobody is left out. We can all participate in moving forward. Now, in terms of the specific issues, there was one about environmental. A number of things are going on in terms of environment. As you know, we have the Ogoni cleanup campaign in which government is putting money, and we're also getting private sector support for it. So there is funding in the budget for environmental issues. And also clean energy. The Ministry of Works, Power and Housing is working on a number of initiatives to expand the use of other sources of energy, clean energy, such as solar, wind, and all. And there's provision for a wind farm project in the budget. So there are a number of things in the budget dealing with improving the environment. As you know, we are committed, to supporting the environmental cleanup. In terms of reversing 70-30 budget, I would say that my ideal would be to take it to even 80%, if I could, capital. The problem is that we've inherited certain costs which are difficult to suddenly change. The bulk of our recurrent costs is in terms of personnel emoluments. Indeed, I think about 70% of our non-debt recurrent is personnel. And at a time that you are in a recession is not the time to embark on a massive retrenchment. So that is why. So we have to work gradually, create growth in the economy, create opportunities, and gradually reduce the size of the civil service with these opportunities. Encourage people to take advantage of these opportunities. But this will take time. And I don't think it would be, the government would like to impose additional hardship on people by embarking on a massive retrenchment now. And that is why we're not doing that. There was a question about the oil price impact on borrowing, savings, and all that. Well, I think right now it's whatever in the 60s. So we are not back to the $100 oil price, and maybe we shouldn't go back to $100 oil price so that we can maintain the discipline to look at alternatives, as Professor Mogalu said. So, but to the extent that we generate more revenues, we will borrow less. Basically, you're borrowing. You project a certain level of borrowing, but you don't actually know how much of that you will utilize. If your revenues are more than your projection, then your level of borrowing will reduce to that extent, because borrowing is only what you need to plug the gap between your expenditure and your revenues. So naturally, as revenues go up, the borrowings will go down. What was the fourth? Education. Indeed, we had a retreat on education, a cabinet retreat a few weeks ago. And it is clear that government alone cannot fund education. I mean, it's very, very clear. And so, but a lot of education, for instance, primary education, secondary education, a lot of it is at the state level. So we have to work with the states to do that. But what we'd like to do is for the government to set standards and encourage private sector participation. Indeed, since we came in as a government, we've licensed a number of private universities. So we encourage private investment in education, and then what the government want to spend most of government revenues would be on ensuring standards and then having some model establishments so that people see what standards, so that the unity schools and all that, we should try and revamp them and maintain high quality standards there. I think those were the four things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Let me just make two very quick comments and then I'll have to be out because I have another program. But on the matter of the 70-30 ratio between, the minister did point realistically to the difficulty. And this is, it's, most of the, after the question of philosophy and strategy, the next level of the problem of the management of Nigeria's economy comes to the fiscal issue of how does the government spend its money. You can spend your money. Nigeria has the lowest level of spending on development in Africa. The reason is precisely because a lot of our expenditure is going to recurrent, and that recurrent, most of it is on personnel costs. Now, what's the solution? Here is a solution I will suggest. Whether the Honorable Minister and our government will try it before 2019, I don't know. But that is a decision for them. Now, nobody needs to suffer in reducing the federal civil service. If you shed the federal civil service by 50 to 60%, you would come to its ideal size. Then you take that ideal size, retrain it, and retool it. But what happens to those you shed? You put out some money. Maybe you package that 500 billion that you're using to give people 5,000. And I'm just being realistic, and put it to better use. If these people are let go, you give them exit packages that they can use to start new businesses and make investments. That way, nobody has to suffer. But you achieve what you want. I'm not advocating that people should be sacked and thrown on the streets, and then you're adding misery to the already difficult situation. That would be inhuman. But the fact is that we have gotten caught in this trap. We're now sort of blackmailed. Our governance is under blackmail by this system, carrying a load that each government inherits, and no government will have the political will to actually shed that load. Because unless that load is shed, the governance of our country will never be efficient and effective. So somebody must bite the bullet at some point. But here is how to bite that bullet so that you can actually do it and you're not increasing human suffering. So there are things called exit packages. It's done in many corporations and in many, you package it and then that's it. But the civil service is down to a proper size, and the savings in the long term are much more than what you spend in the exit package. So that's just my humble suggestion on that. And I can't remember, on the savings from oil and the debt. Now, there are two things I want to say. One is that when we were in the central bank, we suggested to the government that the Nigerian government, and I suggest it again, the Nigerian government needs to take up some hedging mechanism. Hedging is a risk management tool. Some countries use it to manage the fluctuations in the oil price. So if the oil is at $100 per barrel, you may not get that $100. Maybe $30 may go into your hedging arrangement. You get 70. But when oil is at 30, you'll be getting maybe 50 or 60. So that's, in very crude terms, is what the effect of hedging will be. It's a risk management tool which we should consider. Then the next thing is that if we are to reduce our dependence on oil, in terms of, what is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy and management is, by classic definition in economics, about taxation. How the government can raise revenue and spend it. In Nigeria, fiscal policy has become about managing revenues from oil. So in this country, we have invented a new definition of fiscal policy, away from what it should be, which is about taxation. So now, and secondarily, is also about debt management. I want to caution, I've said it before publicly and I say it again, I want to caution the government about continuing to borrow. The history of this country has not shown us that foreign borrowing has been any beneficial to our economy. Check it from 1970 to date. There will always be reasons given to borrow, but the quality of execution of borrowed funds in this country, the story is not a good one. Maybe the minister and his government might reinvent the wheel, and we would love to see that. But the fact of the matter is that spending 66% of our already poor revenues on servicing debt leaves the government little or no room to deliver good governance to Nigerians. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. We just come to the end of this part of this event. But as I said, we'll be breaking out to, different segments. Particularly if you want to talk more about the aspects that have been identified by both the minister and Professor Moghalu, you want to partake of this different sessions. And so we'll be moving on to deep dive session, and we are not doing badly for time. I thought that we were ahead of time. But a Greek will take place here. That will be spoken to by Mr. Kola Masha, and moderated by Tola Adeyemi. We have infrastructure on the ground floor. If you go out this way and go to the right, you would arrive at a hall downstairs. That will be spoken to by Opuyo Ofuri Okuma, and it will be moderated by Mr. Ebenezer Olufo-Oshe. Then we would have solid minerals and mining on the third floor. That will be spoken to by Mr. Ayedun Fashino, moderated by Nike James. And then we would have capital raising for SMEs and finance on the fifth floor. That will be spoken to by Namdo Konkwo and moderated by Chinedum. Chinedum is the moderator for that session. I want to thank you, Honorable Minister and Professor Moghalu. Thank you so much. Thank you particularly to Professor Moghalu for saving us from what would have been a major embarrassment. Thank you. And please, let's transit quietly. And I'll also call on PB to say something at this point finally.
On behalf of all of us at the King's Court, I'd like to very specially appreciate the Honorable Minister for Budget and National Planning for accepting our invitation, for coming here to share his thoughts with us. I think you all heard it's a positive, positive outlook that he has painted for Nigeria and all of the opportunities, and it's really up to us to, if we look around, there are enough reasons and enough challenges, but we have to purpose to surmount those challenges and to make progress in spite of those. And Professor Moghalu, thank you very much, my brother, for stepping up to the plate and for, providing that, perspective. This is what, this is what we intended to, so that we present to everyone a viewpoint. I believe that, we all, as a people and as a nation, are better off, when we have this contest of ideas, and at the end of the day, we determine the best way forward. Thank you very much to both of you for coming. The Honorable Minister brought copies of the abridged version of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. If I asked how many of us have read this document before now, the outcome might be embarrassing. But, this is the abridged version. No, they have hard copies. They hard copies. I hope you have enough. How many? 50. You saw this crowd and you instead of quietly distributing the 50, you told me you had copies. Well, there's a soft copy of it also. So what we're going to do is make sure that all those who registered for this session, whose email addresses we have, can access the soft copy and then have it also on the website for the Outlook Forum. We'll figure out, maybe we'll use age or something and to give out the few copies that are available. But I know also that some people already, one way or the other, have copies of this. But it's an important, let's read it. Don't assume. A lot of us we've grown to become very cynical about nothing going on. There's nothing, things are not. But those who are taking the trouble to really figure out what's going on and what's possible, many of them are making hay. So I encourage us to join that, that group. That document, it's a very good one for us to read. Once again, thank you very much. I think we are just on time now for the breakout sessions.